accused of killing went missing in 2010. Now, originally, investigators believed the family had fled to Mexico for financial reasons. So let's hear from Detective Troy DeGaulle of the San Diego Sheriff's Department regarding that theory.
As a detective, we follow our leads, we follow the evidence, and we chase down every statement and anything anyone ever claims happened. I have to put every one of those things to rest. So now we have the trooper at the border, which would indicate, without a good story behind it, that the McStays are missing, the troopers at the border, there's nothing in the house I find that's suspicious, so why is the trooper at the border and where's the McStays? Well, there's the last known position of the vehicle. I happen to live in San Diego. I know that people frequently illegally park in those parking lots where the McStay vehicle was, and they illegally park there to walk across the border. So I sent a sergeant and another detective down to the U.S.-Mexico border to inquire with Immigration, Customs, and Border Patrol to find any camera that records on either side of the border and to collect all video for the 8th of February 2010 for future review.
And you found a video of what appears to be 2 adults and 2 small children?
I did, and that took quite a bit of work.
We've already heard some testimony. You showed that to the family.
All right. So again, it was believed the McStay family had fled to Mexico back in 2010. Joining my panel at this time is Francey Hakes of Francey Hakes Consulting out of Atlanta, Georgia. Francey, how are you this afternoon?
Good, thanks. How are you?
I'm well. So let's talk about this Mexico theory here. This family, they went missing 2010. You can see an image there of video surveillance at the Mexico border where investigators believe that family of 4 was the McStays. So how much do you think this affected the investigation? Because essentially, to me, it seems like investigators may have gotten tunnel vision to say, well, they went to Mexico, that's it, and we lost 3 years of finding their bodies.
Yeah, I think that's exactly what happened. And I don't understand why they ever really thought that was the family unless they had evidence that they used their passports at that border crossing. Because that picture, all you can see is it's a family of 4. Although, you know, it could be husband and wife, it could be brother and sister, it could be large, older children and smaller children. So I don't really know why they fixated on it, but I think it did adversely affect the investigation. That's why everything took so long in this case.
Right, and Andrew, as you know, an attorney yourself who's worked with investigators, both in the military and on the civilian side, if an investigator came to you and said, hey, well, here's this video of this family going into Mexico, would you take that at face value and say, okay, don't even further investigate this case? Or would you say, hey, listen, okay, that's great, but let's prove that they're actually there. Did they have credit card statements, bank statements? How are they surviving in Mexico for all of these years without a trace?
Right. The idea that we have that image and that was enough to essentially close the case, I don't think that's good enough. I mean, that's not what we expect of investigators.
Right.
Investigators here seem to have been chasing their tail all along. They do initial investigations, then they see this video, then they're coming back years later doing new searches of the home. I think it's best described as them chasing their tail. That's not good. That's not what you want your investigators to have been doing in a murder case.
Yeah, that's not good at all. Let's actually listen to more testimony from Troy DeGaulle, the investigator in this case.
Now we have a family crossing the border that generally fits the general description. Family members are more in support of that could be my family than they were against that could be my family. I don't know Joseph and Summer McStay or the little boys. I know them mentally, but I've never met them. I've never watched them walk. I've never seen them. So I'm going off of what the family's telling me. So I have some belief that could be the McStays going across the border. For me to continue an investigation across the border, we have 2 detectives on the Sheriff's Department still to this day that are international liaison detectives. I incorporated them too. They work, if I send them across the border, it's going to be Tijuana deep. They're not going much further than Tijuana. However, FBI has all kinds of people in Mexico that work for the FBI in the United States, and I can be in contact with them or work through our international liaison detectives to talk to the FBI in Mexico, and we chase down every lead. And we had a lot of leads in Mexico that I had to put to rest. We had family members that were absolutely convinced that they were in Mexico, Costa Rica, Belize. I chased down every one of those leads, regardless of who told me.
All right, so that was more from Troy DeGaulle, who was the homicide investigator for San Diego County, investigating the McStay family murders, who went missing in 2010. The prosecution says Charles Merritt, who was on trial, killed them inside the home, bludgeoned them, and took them to the desert and buried them in 2 shallow graves. Andrew, I know your time with me is coming to an end, so let me toss to you first on this. Not only do we have several years that went by where, again, you can see it there on your screen, investigators believed the McStays had fled to Mexico. But the fact that we have so much limited evidence inside the home when they were reported missing, and not only that, you had individuals inside the home cleaning the home, including Joseph's mother. This really makes this a hard case for the prosecution to prove, because you had that timeline that went by and destruction of evidence at the crime scene. What say you?
Right, Vincent, you and I have talked about that quite a bit, the idea that the crime scenes didn't have the sort of massive amounts of blood or even the reflections of blood through special detection, whether it's cameras or whether it's special lights. That's a major issue in this case. You would expect that with a family of 4 who the prosecution believes was murdered in the home, that there would be greater evidence, not just some droplets that they think might be on a table that show blood. There's some real issues for the prosecution in establishing the details of what occurred. And without being able to do that, that might be enough for an acquittal in this case.
Right. And, Francey, I look at that table and those drops there, which could or could not be blood. And, you know, me having seen a lot of crime scenes in my days of policing, I'm sure you've seen a lot of crime scenes as well as Andrew. That's not what you would expect. To me, I mean, that looks like maybe someone cut their finger in the kitchen and it just dripped on the table as they're trying to get a Band-Aid or move to the sink to wash it off or something like that. It's not what you would expect from this blatant, brutal murder that happened inside this home, according to the prosecution.
No, and I think, Vincent, it's a big weakness in this case, because you've got these graves, you've got dead bodies with blunt force trauma with some kind of a sledgehammer in the grave. So presumably they were killed with headshots by a sledgehammer. So you would expect massive amounts of blood, and you just don't have it in the house, which calls into question whether the house was the crime scene at all. And I'm not sure why the prosecution has gone with a theory they can't really prove.
Yeah, I think at some point, if I was a prosecutor, I would at least come up with an alternative theory to that. We're going to take a quick break. Before I do, I want to sign off my guest, Andrew Charkowski. Thank you so much for joining us, sir, as always. And listen, I was just ribbing you about being Air Force. I'm an old Army guy, but I do thank you for your service, and I thank you for joining us here on the Law and Crime Network. We're going to take a quick break. We have so much more to come in the Charles Merritt murder trial. We're also covering the murder trial in Florida. Stay tuned. We got a lot going on here on the Law and Crime Network. We'll be right back. Hey, welcome back to the Law and Crime Network. I told you we've got a lot going on. We're in jury selection, Kentucky versus DOOLEY. That is a murder trial that we will be covering here on the Law and Crime. We expect that to go live later today or tomorrow morning. He is accused of murder there in the state of Kentucky. Of course, we've been covering Charles Merritt out in California. He's accused of killing the entire McStay family back in 2010. Their bodies were found in 2013 in 2 shallow graves. You can see Charles Merritt there on your screen. And, of course, David Holbrook. We were listening to testimony earlier this morning. Now, he's accused of killing Melissa Howard, a mother of 3 in Florida back in 2006. Now, we heard testimony earlier today from an ex-boyfriend who was actually married at the time, who actually found the bodies. He was the one that called 911. It took investigators several years to get to this defendant that's on trial right now. And quite simply, what was his motive? He was not having a sexual relationship with the victim, nor was he involved with her in any way other than being the best friend of her ex-husband at the time. So we want to hear a little bit of that prosecution opening statement from earlier this morning, and we're expecting that courtroom to go live here any minute. Take a listen.
The dinner that was at Azteca with Brian Howard, was in honor of his girlfriend's son, Tyler Schiltz. Tyler was about to be going back into the military, and so it was a farewell type of dinner for Mr. Schiltz. There were a lot of people at that dinner. Brian Howard, Taylor Howard, Brian's girlfriend Karina, her son Tyler, his friends, Brian Howard's sister and brother-in-law, a very large gathering at Azteca. At the end of that dinner, Brian Howard, Karina, his girlfriend, Taylor, Tyler's friends, all went back to Brian Howard's house, where they stayed for the rest of the night. Also on that Friday night, a birthday party was occurring at David Russell Holbrook's house. That birthday celebration was for his girlfriend's daughter. His brother Michael was there, along with various members of their family and his girlfriend's family. You will hear testimony that Russell and Michael left the party to take Russell's children home to their mother's house, and they dropped the kids off around 9 o'clock. You'll also hear that Russell and his girlfriend Gina spoke by phone at 9:29 p.m. that night. And then you will see Walmart surveillance that shows that the Holbrook brothers went to Walmart at about 9:37 p.m. I need to warn you, these videos are from 2006. They are not good quality. It is the best that we have. You will have a chance to view it. You'll be able to tell it looks like it was on a VCR and then converted to digital. But you can see timestamps and you can see when the Holbrook brothers were at Walmart. The question is, what was Russell Holbrook doing between dropping his kids off at their mom's house and talking to his girlfriend at 9:29 and going to Walmart at 9:37? You will hear also today that Melissa's daughter Carrie had been on a date with her boyfriend, Daniel Bretthauer. Carrie and Daniel arrived home right at 11 o'clock, back to Carrie's home, but the front door was locked. You'll hear that was highly unusual. Melissa Howard always waited up for her kids when they were out. When Carrie arrived home, she couldn't get in. She tried calling her mom. No answer. You will hear that Chris Caden had arrived and had also been trying to reach Melissa Howard. He had spoken with her on the phone after leaving her house earlier that night, and he was on his way to go to a hunting camp with his father-in-law that evening, but he was going to stop by Crestview on the way to see Melissa. Again, he was having an affair. So on the way to meet his father-in-law, he planned to stop by Melissa's house, but he couldn't reach her. He arrived to find Carrie and Daniel on the front porch, unable to get in. And so the decision was ultimately made to try to jimmy the lock open, and Daniel was able to do that with a card. The deadbolt was not locked. He was able to go inside. This is where you will hear of the discovery of Melissa Howard's body. She was found dead against a wall in a pool of blood. You will hear that the living room was in disarray, and you will see photos of what the scene looked like. Couch cushions were all disheveled. Melissa's neck had been slashed, and she was laying against the wall on her right side in a pool of her own blood. You will hear the 911 call that Christopher Caden had made. Again, it is not great quality. You'll be able to understand what's being said, but it is the best we have. While on that call, you'll also hear Christopher Cadenhead having to call his wife, Sherry, and say that he needed her to come to Crestview. That is the night that the news of the affair broke to Sherry Cadenhead, and you'll hear her talk about that. You will hear testimony from the medical examiner, and he will testify to the types of injuries that Melissa Howard sustained. That her cause of death was due to stab wounds, and the manner of death was homicide. You will also hear testimony that Russell Holbrook had been to Melissa's house 2 days prior, on January 4th of 2006. You'll hear about that from Carrie Winkler, Melissa's daughter. You'll also hear testimony from Taylor Howard that he had seen Russell's truck parked near Brian Howard's house that night when Melissa was dropping him off after church. Now, you'll hear that when the defendant was interviewed by law enforcement, he lied about having been at Melissa's house that Wednesday night. You will hear that he said he had not seen her in years. He had not been to her house in years. Hear him admit that he had in fact been there on January 4th, 2006. He claims that he lied because he was afraid of having third-party contact with his wife, Allison, who was going through a divorce with Russell. Allison was living with Brian Howard and his girlfriend at the time. Also during that interview, Russell's first story was that he left his house with Michael about 8:30 to take his kids home and then go to Walmart, and that he returned back by 9 o'clock. As I said, you will get to see a Walmart surveillance video showing that he did not even arrive at Walmart until 9:37 that night. You'll hear a later interview of the defendant where his timeline started changing. In the subsequent interview, he said he left his house at 8:40 or 8:45, dropped his kids off right at 9 o'clock, then went to Walmart and was home by 9:15 or 9:30.
Okay, so that's the prosecution's opening statement in the David Holbrook murder trial. He's accused of killing Melissa Howard. Now, Francey, outside of the timestamp on the video at Walmart, which if I was any half of a defense attorney, I would say, hey, how do we know that timestamp is correct? How do we know they hadn't changed the time from the previous daylight savings time? So you can always argue that. But if I'm the defense attorney here, I'm going to say, hey, first of all, my client didn't have a motive. And the investigator said, hey, listen, originally they didn't have any evidence to tie anything to anyone. So how does this guy go into this home who wasn't having a relationship with her, the boyfriend who was married who called 911 was, how does he go inside this home, commit this heinous crime, and not leave anything for investigators to find at that point? You would have to assume he cleaned that crime scene up, wiped his DNA directly out of that house so they couldn't tie it to him.
Well, Vincent, that's a great point. It's also interesting because, using a knife or a slashing weapon is a very personal crime, as you know. And it doesn't seem to me, at least not in the prosecution's opening statement, that they've tied this offender or this suspect to the victim in any way that would make sense for it to be such a personal crime. And can I also just say, I hate criticizing my former brethren, former prosecutors, because I know what a hard job they had. I've been state and federal prosecutor myself. But my God, when you're given an opening statement, the defense is about to get up in thunder and lightning. You need to tell a story. What is the theme? Engage the jury. It is way too point by point, monotone by monotone. They're not even listening to him anymore.
Yeah, and to your point, the law says you don't have to prove motive, but of course the jury wants to hear motive. And if I'm a juror and I'm sitting there and here's a guy having an affair with the victim and he happens to call 911 from the crime scene, I'm going to question that. I'm going to say this individual had motive. Now, speaking of affairs and victims, we all can remember Kelsey Barrett, who went missing on Thanksgiving of last year. And of course, you can see her there on the screen with her little infant daughter and Patrick Frazeee. Now, there was a preliminary hearing for Patrick Frazeee. Now, this case has a lot of twists and turns as well. You can see Patrick there. There was a nurse that he was having an affair with, KRYSTAL Lee KENNEY. Now, she testified that she met him back in 2006 at a ranch. I believe he was into the rodeo. You can see her there on your screen. They reconnected and started seeing each other last year around May, so just before Thanksgiving of last year. Now, she testified that Patrick Frazeee had told her that, hey, Kelsey is this alcoholic. She's very abusive to our daughter. So he was kind of setting the tone for this. Now, the plan initially, get this, bombshell, she was going to go over to the house, introduce herself as a new neighbor. She was going to put some kind of drug in there that would have poisoned Kelsey Barrett, but of course she didn't go through with that. Now she testified that, listen, when I didn't do that, Patrick became upset. He became enraged that I wouldn't do it. You can see again KRYSTAL Lee KENNEY on your screen there. Now this is her testimony. Now, we always talk about these affairs that lead to murder, and it looks like this is one of those cases. I mean, a lot of people from the beginning questioned this. I mean, here's a couple that's supposedly engaged. They have this young daughter, but yet they're not living together. So there was a lot of red flags from the beginning. Then, of course, we know her cell phone was found some 700 miles away, which was really suspicious. Now, we know that this nurse actually moved that cell phone there to make it ping, to make it look like maybe she went on vacation. Kelsey Barrett had gone on vacation, and there was actually a text to her boss that said, oh, I'll be taking a vacation for a few days. But prosecutors believe that that text was either sent by Patrick or by the woman he was having an affair with. So much going on here on the Law and Crime Network. I told you, you don't want to miss it. We're going to take a quick break. We'll get right back into the courtroom on the other side. Stay tuned to the Law and Crime Network. All right, so that's testimony from Sherry Cadenhead. Now, she is the wife of Chris Cadenhead, who was having an affair with the victim. Now, Chris is not the one on trial here. Now, Francey, I had said this in your ear while that testimony was going on, and you kind of chuckled. Were they having a family reunion at the crime scene? I mean, Chris is there, she's there, her father's there. You got all of these family members here. And one of the questions I asked you off the air was, it makes no sense that he would actually call his wife to come to the crime scene unless, in my opinion, he's trying to paint himself as, hey, I'm this honest guy, I had nothing to do with that. Why would I call my wife here and I'm having this affair with this lady if I had anything to do with the murder? To divert suspicion off him. What say you?
Yeah, Vincent, I think you're right. It does sound like an alibi maker. I mean, why else do you call your wife to the house of your dead mistress when if you say nothing, there's no chance she'll ever learn anything? It makes no sense.
That makes no sense. And I mean, it's almost something you would see in a Lifetime movie or a Tyler Perry movie. I just don't get the logic in this. Again, unless he's trying to set an alibi. Now, we can go over his timeline. He said he got home at 8:25 to 8:30 or he left work around that time. He got home about 9:15. His wife said that. Of course, the 3-year-old at the time can't testify to that. He said he left the house around 10:15 to go to this hunting trip, and he mysteriously ends up at the house, and he mysteriously is the guy that calls 911. There's so much going on with this trial, but we're going to take a quick break. We got a lot to cover here, as always. I'll be signing off. Michael Bryant will be taking over, guiding you through the next couple of hours of this trial. You don't want to miss it. We can't make this stuff up. Stay tuned to the Law and Crime Network. We'll be right back.